You're listening to Inflow and On Fire, your weekly podcast companion for finding your flow and stoking your inner fire. I'm your host, Quinn Curtis, artist, mother of five, and aspiring children's book author illustrator. Every month, our soulful discussions spark from a relevant fairy tale or myth. These help us better understand how to navigate our inner worlds and everyday lives so that we can live more joyfully, bring those big and beautiful dreams to life, and make the world a better place. Want to get the most out of this episode? Well, be sure to snag the free gorgeous study guide in the show notes that includes a written copy of the fairy tale or myth, soulful journaling questions, and other additional juicy resources. Kathy, I'm so happy to have you back. I was just remembering that when you and I were first just getting to know each other, I just could not even resist saying this about you because as I just learned more about you and got more connected, I was like, Kathy is my freaking spirit animal because I'm just so inspired by your strength and the way you do life. And I'm just thrilled to have you in this particular conversation also that can be a little tougher. And so I'm just thrilled you're here. Thanks for joining me, Kathy.
Oh my gosh. Thanks so much for having me, Quinn. Oh my God. You crack me up as your spirit animal. I appreciate that. That is a huge compliment. So thank you.
My pleasure. Well, it still holds true today. I'm always like, what is Kathy the unicorn doing with her amazing life now? And just so proud of you. So first initial thoughts though, we're getting into October and a little bit spookier myths and stories and themes. What were your initial thoughts and impressions with the Bluebeard story? Because you hadn't heard it before this, right?
No, I hadn't heard it. So this was my first time hearing about Bluebeard and reading about it. And so I didn't realize when I read it that actually there was so much to it.
Yeah.
The way that this book, and I have the book here,
Women Who Run with the Wolves,
goes into it. And immediately I started thinking about intuition and trusting ourselves and the conditioning of society for women and. And so I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know the story at all of Bluebeard. So I'm really, I guess I'm surprised. I have so many questions for you that we can, to ask you about this story and the symbolism of the key, the little key with the scroll and whatnot. So yeah, it was very, it was eye-opening. I guess I didn't know what that story was and the depth behind it. So I'm still, there's a lot to think about.
It's very haunting, I think, especially your first time through it. You're like, whoa, what just happened? I think it just strikes a chord in us that is really raw and deep. And so it's a neat experience of getting to hear it. If you haven't yet listened, please go back and listen to the story. But I love what you're saying. And yeah, I remember my first time hearing it as well. I believe, I tend to be somebody who gets kind of creeped out easily. So I'm not super into scary things. And I remember just having this creepy feeling after reading it, even for the first couple days. It just kind of did haunt me. So it's an important story though. I've told it to my girls, at a young age, even probably too young. But I was just feeling like this is such an important story, especially for girls, because I could see all the ways that this story has played out in my own life and in the women around me too.
Yes, I was thinking about, oh my gosh, the same thing, Quinn. In some of the conversations we've had, this story has played out in things that we've talked about, like not trusting ourselves or what do you think? And not listening to the intuition or whatnot. And the story about that parents need to teach their children this. So I love that you talk to your kids about it because I was like, how do I talk to my own child about this? Right. It is really the what I messaged you about, oh, his beard's not that blue, it's not that bad. Right. and the things we
Yeah.
do to convince ourselves otherwise. That is something that I love that you talk to your kids about. I need to do the same because
Mm.
I was like, whoa, it's really profound. And so, yeah, go on. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that's maybe a perfect entry point into the story of maybe let's kind of hit it in some of those scenes and like how that plays out. So I love the his beard's not really that blue, that justification game that we play. I think that that one has really tripped me up. In fact, I loved in Clarissa Pinkola Estes' commentary how she talks about how we teach girls to be nice, right? It's like this
Yeah,
training to be nice that keeps us from actually listening to our intuition.
yeah,
Um, it was reminding me, even my girls are both, they've both been dealing with some relationship issues with boys and lately, and they've said interesting things where they're like, well, I either need to just deal with how it is, which is a situation they're not thrilled with both of their boys, and then, or they need to do something worse so I feel like I can leave. And I'm like, what the? No,
oh,
no. And so we've been having this conversation a lot lately about like you feeling a no is enough always.
yes. Oh, Quinn, you're a good mom. I to just say that to them, you feeling a no is enough always. I mean, whoa. Yes. I mean,
It's
I
shocking to feel like you have to say that though, but it's not normal, right? In our society and the
no,
status quo, like we don't just
no,
teach girls that.
no. In fact, in the story, going back to just being a parent, when the mom, so Bluebeard
Yeah.
invites the young girl's family with her and says, eat whatever you want, drink whatever you want, go anywhere you want in my castle, except this one room. And the mom, they call out, right? The author calls
Mhm.
out that the mom is part of it. Like, oh, what a wonderful day we've had. We've had a picnic, we've done, whatever
Mhm.
we've spent the day together. We have all these keys. So let's go have fun and see where all the keys, which doors the keys open. Like the mom isn't even saying, hey, excuse me, there might be a problem here, or hey, this is a little strange, and so I guess it goes
Mhm.
back to our jobs as parents to help with that self-worth and nurture that intuition. Because the two other daughters were like, I don't know if I trust him still,
Mhm.
but I think it goes, so my daughter had some issues with a bully and I had to talk to the mom
Mhm.
about it, and the mom called me judgmental, and another mom friend of mine, her daughter's having issues with bullies too, and I love what she said. She's like, it's our job. Let her call you judgmental. It's our job to help our kids pick the best person to be their friend. I was like, oh,
Mhm.
right. It's our job for us to introduce our kids to better people that maybe match our values a little bit better.
Mhm.
And so that role plays out in, right, the be
Yeah.
nice, or the old school things that we're told that we're trying to break, right? That generational
Mhm.
systemic um, view of women, right? Where we
Yeah.
are trying to break it for our generation, right? It's through these kinds of conversations.
Well, and isn't it crazy with what you're saying? I bet you felt the temptation too. Like we have the other story handy. Like we could have told the other version, like with my daughters, I have the story of like, well, this is how you get a guy to treat you good and act like this is how you get him to like you. Like I
Other good,
have those answers, quote unquote, too. But like recognizing like it's like the mom, like you're bringing up, like colluding with the Bluebeard of like this, what a lovely day with a really great guy. And
yes,
it's wild how there's that temptation, which comes from generations of mothers and women before us who are like, this is how you stay safe in a patriarchal society. Like, this is how you play the game. And thankfully, we're shifting into a world where you don't have to. And it's so thrilling to be able to tell our girls the truth now that your no is enough, or you don't have to be with bullies and just make nice and act like it's not bothering you.
Yes, exactly. And speak up. Like, speak up if you're getting
Mm,
bullied. And, oh, and be the truth teller. Yes, there are consequences to that. But boy, wouldn't you rather be the truth teller than walk around, with what this story talks about, with which is
mhm.
the key, the bleeding key is the knowing. You can't
Yeah.
unknow. And if so, you're bleeding. You know that what the truth is. So you can hide all you want, but it has to come out at some point, right? Like that bleeding key when she's like
Mhm.
trying to cover it with ash or trying to wash it, and it's like it's that knowing. Um,
Mhm.
and and I think it's my so this the little bully, or the whatever we can call her, the bully. But anyway, she saw my daughter just recently, just 2 nights ago at the park, and she said, I miss you, and I want to see you. And so my daughter's like, I really want to see her. And we have, this is like a dilemma, a moral dilemma, because
Mm.
this bullying and this manipulation happens over, it's a cycle with this
Yeah.
child. And I'm like, I am so done. And I tried to tell my daughter, when we're with that little girl, you get hurt and we get hurt. And, it's not okay to just constantly get hurt. And so she said, well, she
Wow.
messaged me. She wants to see me on, she messaged me on Facebook Messenger or whatever they're talking on. And I just said, no, no, like no more. I can't, I don't want you to get hurt. I don't want us to get hurt. It is, um, and how do you feel? And she said, I really miss her. And I said, but how do you feel when she treats you? And she was like, I don't really like it because she changes her mind all the time, or she's a different kid, or she's, and so I'm trying to get her to listen to herself of like,
Mhm.
what do you feel? Because it's, this cycle of they become friends, and this bully comes
Mhm.
back out, and, the kids play out what's going on in their homes, right? And so stuff
Yeah.
is going on, in the home, and it's going to come up. And so, and it comes up again
Yeah.
and again. So anyway, going back to the no, like
Mm.
no, like no is a full sentence, period. And girls need to not stuff that down to be the good girl, right? Don't stuff it. Don't,
Mhm.
because the key's going to bleed once you see the truth, right?
Mhm. God, and what you're saying, it just is reminding me too of just the aspect of kind of believing in the fantasy of who someone is instead of the reality. Like with what you're talking about with your daughter, I see my girls doing that same thing too. They're only remembering the best parts of that person,
Yes.
right? And it helps them justify in their mind, oh, well, I was probably being too judgmental. I was probably being too sensitive, right?
Yes.
And they just turn the knife
Yes.
inwards.
My gosh. It is Quinn. Yes. Yes. How is it that then all of a sudden they take it on when it's not even their problem to take on, right? All of a sudden
Yes.
we're feeling bad for stuff that isn't even ours, or we're apologizing for things that aren't even ours. And yeah, 100%. They forget, they idealize the person, right? Oh my God,
Yes,
and hey, I'm not perfect either. I've done it too. We've all done it, right?
absolutely. Absolutely. And honestly, that was something in my reading of it the second time that really rocked my world, is recognizing, I think there's a part in her commentary where she specifically says, in fact, I know there is. I've got it right here. Um just about how it's the Bluebeard inside of each of us that goes along with it basically. She's oh god, sorry. So it's not fast to find, apparently, but it's just, yeah, basically that Bluebeard part of us will collude with the outer Bluebeard. And so I think, because there's been a way in my brain where I've kind of justified, well, just some people aren't maybe that safe for me, or some people are. But then reading that, I could see that's a huge way where I get trapped in these situations, or I get stuck there, is because there's a part of me, the saboteur, that's just like, well, you're being a little sensitive. Aren't you being too judgmental, like that lady called you? Come on. And like it's just crazy how I think, like, I didn't realize the enemy was in the house, you know?
Yes. Yes. Oh my gosh. And that's so funny because I also starred or put a little, I was writing in the, as I was reading it, that area too, about
Mm.
we all have the blue beard in us and the predator that comes out and sabotages our sense of self. It's us sabotaging us. It's like, gosh, the
Yes.
whole deal is to get ourselves under control, whether it's the thoughts, the emotions, the whatever, yes, it's, yeah, it is the second guessing of our thoughts. And what I had learned, just through therapy, honestly, and
Mm.
talking to my neighbor, who's a therapist, who has the most interesting stories. But basically, when you second guess yourself, and don't trust yourself, one, it's because your parents didn't validate you enough.
Mm.
And when you get exploited as a child, exploited meaning no one believes you or no one has your back to an excess, and doesn't validate your feelings, doesn't validate your sense of self, then you are left with confusion of, did I say the right thing? Or gosh, did I da 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 da? Right? Isn't
Mm.
that crazy? So it's from
Yeah.
childhood trauma of not being validated enough as a kid
Mm.
to have that innate trust in yourself. So I'm like, gosh, I try and over validate my daughter. Like, yes, those are, yes, even if they're the craziest feelings, I'm like, they're your feelings.
Yeah. Hey, own them. Yeah.
But it comes from, frankly, neglect. So that's the second thing, right? Is neglect and having emotionally
Mm.
immature parents. And that was really eye opening for me to learn
Yeah.
that because 2 weeks ago, I was chatting with an executive of a company. We were going back and forth on email. And after we were done, it was like, have a good weekend, have a good weekend. And I was like, oh my gosh, should I have said that? Should I have done that? And I'm like, oh, that's your trauma talking. That's your trauma saying,
Mm.
like you don't, like, oh, am I okay? Did it, what I say, is that okay? Right? So isn't that fascinating?
It's so fascinating. It's like it's just making me think the inner critic, it's like that voice too, right? That's just like holding us back. And it's reminding me of this quote too, which I'll just read really quick from Clarissa Pinkola Estes. She says, the presence of this factor in the psyche accounts for why women who say they wish to have a relationship instead do all they can to sabotage it, a loving one. This is how women who set goals to be here, there, or wherever by such and such time never even begin the first leg of the journey or abandon it at the very first hardship. This is how all the procrastinations which give rise to self-hatred, all the shame feelings which are pushed down and and a way to fester, all the new beginnings which are sorely needed, and all the long overdue endings which are not met. Whenever the predator lurks and works, everything is derailed, demolished, and decapitated.
Amen. I mean, I also starred that block, that paragraph, because it sums it up, what we're talking about, exquisitely.
It's profound, right? Like it keeps hitting me where I'm like, why am I holding back from this thing right now? And I've gotten a lot more curious since this rereading and really looking at the story again, like we've been doing, and trying to like anthropomorphize a little bit that aspect of myself of like, oh, that's the Bluebeard predator kind of energy talking. That's not actually me. That's not actually a voice of wisdom or kindness, and it's so funny how often that can trick me. Like I've been so excited. We're going to try this new workout routine. We got exercise rings for our garage and we've got this vision of what we're going to do. And it's been 3 to 4 weeks and they're still sitting in our garage and we haven't actually done it, And so I'm just really looking at like getting curious about that part of me instead of shaming and guilting, which seems to like build up that character more in me, to be like, oh, we should do better. And we're just so lazy, It's like, that's not actually real. Like, why are we avoiding this? Let's get curious.
Right. Exactly. And wouldn't it be great if we didn't shame and instead celebrated? Instead of like, what if we turn the
Mm.
shame, every comment of shame or self doubt is a celebration, meaning,
Hmm.
how about if you took that voice and it was a, oh my gosh, I am so psyched that I actually bought that stuff. I'm so psyched that it's going to be there. And when we get to it, we're going
Mm.
to install it and we're going to use it. Like, what if that was the voice?
I love
Like,
that.
flip it on its head and
Hmm.
like, wow, like, look at how far we've come in our careers. Like, we're just getting started, or something, or whatever it is, right?
Hmm.
It's so, the voice doesn't have to be of shame. It
Hmm.
needs to be more than that. That's easy. It's easy to go to shame, right? For some reason, it's
Hmm.
easy to just go there instead of being like, wow, what an awesome thing we just did, you
Easy
know?
and or habitual, right? Of
Yeah.
like,
Hmm.
it's just a habit to go to shame. Yeah,
Hmm.
you're so right. I love what you're saying. It's reminding me of the concept of how anxiety and excitement are just like basically the same emotion and it's just dependent on where you're focusing. And so I
Yeah.
love that of like, oh, I'm so excited to put up the rings. I'm so excited to try these new things. So yeah, that's huge. What about let's see, like just the stories that we're, I don't know, I think about like the stories that we're telling ourselves about why we can't do what we want is also a way that the predator kind of shows up in our heads. You probably don't have any of this, Kathy, going on in your world at all, but just those stories about why we can't do what we really want, does that show up in your world at all, Kathy?
Yeah. Oh, yes. And again, I do think it is the habitual voice that just needs to be told, like, you're not helpful. It's not helpful. Like, why can't we do this? Why can't I, or why aren't things different or whatever it is?
Hmm.
What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, this is it is I'm so glad we're talking about habitual. Like that for some reason feels really important because like when I hear habitual, I think, oh, I can change that. That's a habit I can change, right? And I
Mhm.
see so many of these stories and these patterns feeling like before that kind of awareness, it feels like, well, this is just how I am, right? Or this is just how it is. And so it's a really, really important distinction. I see that in my kids too, of like already they're starting to say things, well, I'm just kind of lazy. I'm like, whoa, stop right there. Like, let's not take that on as an identity. That's not helpful. And it's not even true, like what's actually true. Because those kinds of stories are even more damning. Like when I had like really severe debilitating depression and anxiety in my past, I was recognizing how the identity of I am depressed or I am anxious or I have this illness even like were such limiters. Like those stories just, basically locked me in Bluebeard's dungeon without the key and I didn't feel like free to do things outside of those outside of being depressed and anxious because it was the identity. And so I
Yeah.
think that even like in the Bluebeard conversation, our identities absolutely can be a Bluebeard and can be a way that it just traps us and ravages us of our joy and what we want to do and what we want to create.
Yeah, well said. The you mentioned something that I wanted to go there. I wanted to go there for a second
Mm-hmm.
about this is how I am. That statement, I had like a visceral reaction because I've heard it from people, I see it from people, and it's so easy to say, this is the way I am. And does that statement come from lack of like a growth mindset? Maybe it's not a lack at all.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe it's because I'm so solid in who I am and feel confident that this is the way I am. This is, like strong woman, outspoken woman, blah, blah, blah. This is the way I am. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I I can see both sides. And I've
Yeah.
seen it where this is the way I am concerning, right? Where it's so black and white and so rigid.
Yeah.
Um, but then there's but I know I have a weakness and this is the way I am. But I guess what I'm saying is I've seen all kinds of sides of this is the way I am.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's complicated. It's complex. It's yeah, when you were talking about, you know, depression and anxiety, and that's like one persona
Hmm.
or, one identity.
Hmm.
It doesn't have to be the identity. Although I would say people live in that identity. That's who they are. Like, I am anxious. I'm an anxious person. This is the way I am.
Yeah, totally.
So what are your thoughts on that like that statement, this is the way I am? Like, do you have a visceral, or do you have like a
Absolutely. I'm loving what you're bringing forward because it's like reminding me of like the rigidity that we feel when we have such a solid identity, and how that really, to have a solid identity in some ways, like I'm just exploring this out with you too, but like in the way that
yeah.
I'm experiencing it, feels like when you have that solid identity of even the identity of I am strong, what we lock up in the basement is our weakness. We can't even see it. We can't even like be in the same room with it. We pretend it's not there. We pretend not to notice the bleeding K. It's like, to each of these things, I think like being a whole person is recognizing the dichotomies within us, recognizing that we are both strong and weak. We are both miraculous and magical and messy.
Yes, I love that. Messy, yes. Miraculous, yes. Like strong and weak, yes. Like the polarities can both exist. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be so black and white where this is the way I am, right? Because then I think
Mm-hmm.
about values, and values aren't typically malleable.
Yeah.
They are values. They are black and white, like integrity, like whatever.
Mm.
Although to live through them, right, the values themselves, those words are black and white. They are what they are, right? The
Yeah.
definition is like, what is that movie that I love, Something's Got to Give, when he's like, I was just sharing a version of the truth, and she's like, there are no versions of the truth. Right? And
I love that.
so I love that movie. And so I think about values as being, the words, the definition of whatever those are, integrity, humility, whatever. Living
Mm.
through them, though, I think is where things can get squishy for people, right? Like being in
Yeah.
integrity 100%, being in whatever 100%, um, and to aspire to something, right? Is,
Mm.
but then people can, I guess, they can use values and say, this is just the way I am. This is how I just operate. And those aren't bad values, right? Like just throwing out integrity and humility as like
Mhm.
two values, of this is
Yeah.
the way I am. But when it gets to righteousness, or when it gets to the hard hitting um, things like, I don't know, I'm just throwing out a couple, I'm in tricky territory right here, but
Yeah.
I think,
Hey, we both are. We're just feeling through it though. We're just discussing
yeah,
possibilities, right?
yeah. And so when I guess people have this is how I am, and everything else is locked up in the basement, and they're not willing to look at it or go in there, that's when the this is where I am to me is questionable, or
Ooh,
ooh,
I love what you're pointing out. Yes. Yep. And
like,
and honestly, it makes a not very safe person whenever
yes,
somebody's really rigid that way and they've locked things up. Like that's where I feel like even as you were saying integrity, it's like, gosh, is that even possible to live in like perfect integrity all the time? I don't know, because guess what? I lie to myself all the time. So I don't I don't know.
and the white lies we tell to like not hurt feelings or whatever. I mean,
Exactly.
go back to what you said about, is this person safe? Can you explain what that means? Like,
Mm,
is this safe?
absolutely. Well, it's like if somebody is believing, like, let's take the strong identity, right? Like, if they're believing that they are a strong person that's just who they are, they are really living in that persona, then they're locking up the aspect of their own weakness, their own dependency, their own even their emotions could be down there, right?
Vulnerability, right?
Vulnerability. Wow. Yeah, exactly. And
Okay.
so then if that's locked up for them, they cannot tolerate vulnerability, weakness in those around them. Right. And so even if they're kind of dancing on that, I've just noticed that in my relationships lately where I'm recognizing the people I feel the most safe with are the people whose they don't have a cellar door that's like locked up and like,
Right.
like they're not hiding
Yes.
something from themselves, even like they're open to the dichotomies and the contrast within themselves. And they recognize that being a human is messy and they're doing
Yes.
their best.
They're doing their best. And isn't that part of like authenticity? Because is it authentic
Mm,
in the way that we're talking about it to say, this is
yeah.
how I am? It could be, that could be authentically them. But the point of the locking it up, there's no flexibility there. There's
Yeah.
no curiosity. There's no, let me change your mind, or let me influence, or let's have a discussion about it, because it's one way. It's a
Mm,
monologue, not a dialogue at that point, in my opinion, right?
yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's the dialogue, I think, where the
Mm,
magic is. And um, you know, this is an
love
interesting
that.
story. So we have some friends who have a child, and they've said, this is the way we are. We're just not warm, fuzzy people. So when their daughter was a baby, they hired a woman from Mexico who's this, abuela, like
Mm,
cozy, just loved on the baby. And they were just like, yeah, that's just not who we are. I don't know what to say, because I'm like, well,
wow.
why? You can learn how to be that way, or maybe you don't want to, or maybe, so that it was just, I don't know. I was just a little surprised
Yeah.
that
Well,
they're not warm fuzzies. They know it, but they're like, and that's just the way we are. And I'm like, is it that easy? No, like I don't live my life like that. So I just
right.
was like, well,
Well,
then why don't you learn how to be more vulnerable or loving or warm or whatever? But that they are okay with that.
Well, and don't you find the more you do your own personal work, the less sure you are of like a fixed identity in some ways? Like I'm just listening to this and I'm thinking, I don't know. Like I could say that I'm not a very outgoing person. I don't know if that's because of conditioning and crappy beliefs and little Bluebeard aspects that are still in me though. Like I don't know that that's just who I am. I'm nervous to just claim that now?
Yes. Yeah. Nervous to claim it. I love that, because there are things that I can claim,
Mm.
but there are things that I'm like, I'm not the expert at that. Am I really sure about that? Right. Like, yeah, nervous to claim it. I think that's really, and so when I hear hey, and maybe I'm being judgmental, but when I hear that this is how we are, I'm
Yeah.
like, uh, the little voice goes off and I'm like, what the fuck is that?
Yeah, exactly. How can
Like,
you be so sure? Have
okay,
you looked? Have you asked? Like, are you curious?
yeah, and are you done? So that's it?
Are you done? Yeah, you've
That's the
arrived.
story?
You've arrived to we are not this. Yeah.
Or just, that's it.
Wow.
I'm done. I'm never doing that. I'm never gonna, whatever. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, I just like
Wow.
this curiosity and almost sadness washed over me in the situation of like, well, that is sad. Like, I feel sad that you wouldn't be curious to explore it, or, what is that
Mhm.
life going to be like? It's a different life, right?
It's so true. It's like honestly reminding me of like the big journey you and I have been going on over the past year plus
What a
of what
journey.
we had locked up in our little dungeon was a lot of our femininity, right? And
Yes.
working in this corporate atmosphere or going out and being a go-getter and taking on such a masculine vibe, right? An identity to be able to survive and do well.
Yes. Like lock and key feminine. What? Like just being in this executive brain and not being embodied. Like, what does the body want? What is the body saying? Oh, wait a minute, stress, anxiety, whatever, right?
Mm,
And being more, I would say, human, being a woman, right? Being more
mm,
compassionate, being, I know people say, oh, the stereotypes of women being nurturing, being giving, being a receiver, being, whatever it is. And, there's no shame in that when you are fully embodied in your feminine and you know how to use your masculine when you need to use it. Um, both need to exist to be a whole person as a woman. And to
Mm.
discount one over the other, to think one is better than the other is a disservice.
Yeah.
Right. And so you need both. And I think that's kind of been a good journey in this last year of understanding that growth and what is expected in society of us as women in corporate jobs, right? There is
Mm.
this, we feel it. You feel it when you're in it. It's hard to explain, but you feel it, right?
Yes, absolutely. Even like in my last job, I was told regularly that I was too emotional.
What?
Oh, yeah. When I'm like watching, the men in the room be just as emotional, right? And even just all the ways that, I mean, if you're in this space, you probably hear this rhetoric a lot, but it is really interesting how our society is kind of shaped how women should behave in those circumstances versus men, and like, softening our messages so that they are received better. We don't want to be seen as too attacking, or, I mean, there's just so many things, but because I'm fascinated by like, how did we get there? Right. And like I believed, I think you probably did too. I think we've talked about this, but you can clarify, but that like I just wasn't that feminine.
Yeah.
Like it was that identity, right?
It was that identity. You were told you were too emotional. I was told I was too intimidating.
Just to hear it, you've told me this before, but to hear it again, I'm still like the audacity.
And I thought, I was looking back in my files of my life, and yes, sure, it is the way I live my life can be intimidating to some people. Like, I don't know if I told you this, but
Mhm.
Tim and I are going to go run a half marathon in the Great Wall of China next year.
So cool. I love
That's why
it.
we roll, right? Like, that's what we do. And I mean, I've had this couple we hang out with, the wife says, it is like you really live your life to the fullest. I mean, it's kind of intimidating. And I'm like, well, then go do it, right? Nothing's stopping you,
Mhm.
right? Or, oh, the jobs you've had are kind of intimidating. What? For who? For who, right? I
Mm.
mean, I remember when I was younger, I was in Little League. Little League was really big growing up, baseball, right? Little League baseball.
Mm.
And I was the only female catcher in the entire league. And I was really good. And people would come out to see me. And did we talk about this?
Yes, yeah, but not on the podcast. So yeah, keep
Oh,
going.
okay, okay. And people come out to see me play and like, oh my God, this little petite little catcher with all of her gear on and the face thing and the pads. And I was just like, I mean, sucking up all the balls and hurling them to the second base and first base and whatever, or getting people out at the plate. And that was like intimidating to people, like, oh my God, this girl, she is an amazing catcher. And the
Mm.
boys would be like, oh, whoa, she's amazing. And the girls
Mhm.
didn't like it. And I
Yeah.
thought, why? How about we lift each other up, even though, or even so? Like, what is that? Those
Mm.
words, right? That those things that stereotypes. So be nice. Don't be too loud. Don't take up too much space. Don't be too big. Don't be too much. Right.
Mhm.
My mom still, when I would talk to her on the phone, be a good girl. That's how she sorry.
What?
That's how
You're
she ends our conversation. Be a good girl. I go, oh, please. I just call her out. I go, oh, please. I'm not going to be. And then
You should know by now, mom.
I don't even know why you say that. Like, please, like, be a good girl. See, still,
Wow.
she's 78, I think. 78.
Wow.
Be a
Yeah.
good girl.
And like what I'm just seeing as you're sharing this is just like little girl Kathy who's kicking ass on the on the field, or God, I
Yeah.
don't know baseball terminology, but but you're intimidating, quote unquote, but you're just having a blast and you're in your
Yes.
strength and you're feeling
Yes.
great. And to you, it's not feminine or masculine. You're just playing all out and having fun. And then how over time that light starts to dim, right? Those parts of you are no longer accepted or people are threatened. And so you're like, okay, quiet it down, put it away, hide it in the basement a little bit, and until one day you're looking back and you're like, wait a minute, why is it wrong to be intimidating? Like, where did this even come from? This is, like it's a weird thing how that
Yep.
happens, right?
Yep. And then you're in the business then of managing perceptions. So then it's all about, oh, if people think this way of you, you are too much, too whatever, too sensitive, too emotional, whatever. You got to lock it away,
Mm.
and then you can't be you, regardless. Right?
Right.
So then it goes back to this whole DEI stuff, right? Where,
Mm.
well, are we accepting of everybody? No, not really. And so then you have to create that other persona that is acceptable to wherever you are. And then you're in the business then of managing perceptions, which frankly
Mm.
is a very slippery slope, because if we go into perception now, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Quinn.
Yes, let's do. Yeah, I love this.
Perception, um, managing perception it's tough, because then you're trying to get into the psyche of someone else and the way they feel about you. And
Mm.
as women, maybe just people in general, but I'll just say women, I would say, I'm going to stereotype a little bit and generalize that there's the need to be liked.
Mhm.
So then the perception then is, do they like me? The management of the perception is, do they like me?
Well,
Right.
and
Or
let's remember, like, this wasn't dumb that women put this in place. Like, it was physically, literally dangerous to not be liked, 100 years plus ago.
really?
Absolutely. Because, I mean, we're talking back in the days where your husband could say, oh, she's crazy, and could get you locked up because he's tired of you and you're
You're
in the
right.
mental institution. I mean, women just, we haven't had rights that very long. So we've had to
That's
create
true.
some of these coping strategies of be liked, be nice, don't ruffle feathers, don't rock the boat, because it was literally dangerous.
Oh yeah, you're right. The lobotomy.
Yep.
Like, yeah. Okay. So it was dangerous. I mean, yes, that's right. Absolutely. 100%. I didn't, yeah,
I
that.
didn't mean to derail you though, but yeah,
No,
I
no,
was
I
just
didn't even think of
agreeing.
that. Like
Yeah.
until you just said it, I'm like, no, you're right. Like we're in the business of having to manage perception, manage
Yes,
in a different way that I would say men don't.
I
They are
agree.
granted, like they're strong men, whatever, they could be abrasive, aggressive, whatever. It's a different rule book for that system
Mhm.
than it is for
Yeah.
us. If we're not warm enough or nurturing or whatever, right? We have those things, and they're not, again, bad or wrong, but
Mhm.
when we have to overmanage and lock stuff up in the basement, then you have to wonder, is this the right place for me? Am I in the
Yeah.
right? And then those questions come up, but we stuff them down, right? We don't trust ourselves. We don't, and we ask but his beard's not that blue,
Yeah.
right? Or maybe it's me. Oh, I'm so sorry. Did I offend him by saying, by
Mhm.
thinking I might not like that blue beard? Do you know, right? Like,
Yes. Yes, it's just making me imagine the story a little differently, where if she had somehow hid the key and gotten away with it and continued to try to live with Bluebeard, like, which we all do. We've had experiences like that, right? Like exactly to what you're describing, where we're
yeah,
just managing the perceptions and like, make sure everybody feels okay about us as best as we can manage. And meanwhile, you're living knowing it's not safe for some reason. Like there's alarm bells going off in my head, but I can't address that because I have to stay safe. So I think like the stay safe aspect of it is a crucial thing to recognize. Like,
yeah,
and like to not take this subject lightly, which we certainly aren't, but just to really like give yourself grace as you're even looking at some of these concepts, because I mean, you're likely falling into these Bluebeard types of situations because of programming and because of like it wasn't being safe for centuries until now. Like we're learning a new way, which is to live more in alignment with our heart and soul and our intuition, and to live in better balance. But I think it's a scary thing to recognize, or to contemplate that safety going away, whether it's the safety of a job, the safety of a marriage, the safety of parents and people that you've grown up with caring about you still or valuing you, the safety of being liked by the other parents or like in your kids class, or like there's all these aspects of safety that we kind of have to dance around all the time.
Yes. Interesting word, safety. Interesting word. Yep. Dancing around safety. Which, going back to the story, this question kind of dovetails into what you just said
Yeah.
with the seller. So there's the key with the scroll on it. And he said, don't go in that room. And they go in the room and they see dead bodies of and bones and what skulls and everything of his previous wives. You don't find out that it's his previous wives, right, until later. But what the author says, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this, was okay, so yeah, so she tried to hide the key, but it's bleeding, so she can't unknow the knowing. And if she could, she'd still have that little voice nagging that there are bodies. What are those bodies, right? And then he finds out, she goes in the room and he's going to kill her. And then I think the author mentions he's going to kill her anyway. So it was like a damned if I do, damned if I don't. Because no
Wow.
matter what, at some point he's, you know what I mean? So there is like
Chills. Yeah.
right? Like in life, whether you manage the perception, you're damned if you do or you're damned if you don't. There's always going to be the haters are going to hate. People aren't going to like you. They're going to think this about you, and there is, I think, a false narrative that there has to be this, everyone has to like you in order to be successful. Everyone has to da 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 da, right? As a woman, and the magic, and Brene Brown will say it over time, over and over, right? The magic is get in the arena and have the conflict. That's where you are vulnerable and you have the meat of a relationship, right? Or the growth that trust builds and all these loyalty and dependence, and not healthy dependence, right? But regardless, I want to get your thoughts on that. The damned if you do, damned if you don't, because she was going to die anyway, is how I read the story. I don't know if you read it like that, but that's how I read it, that even if she didn't go in that room, that's what it was for anyway.
I love so much that you're bringing this out, because this honestly hadn't been an element of the story that I had gravitated towards or really had been emphasized. So as you're pointing it out, it's hitting me really strongly right now. And I'm just feeling like, and remembering even all the times where I was like, in a doomed to fail circumstance or relationship where I believed if I could just play the game a little bit better, be a little bit more what they wanted, it would end differently. When in reality, it was always going to end that way,
Yes.
regardless.
Yes.
No small thing.
It's no small thing. It's so the pretend all you want. And she does talk about that in that passage that you read, right? Stuff it down, whatever. It comes out in weird ways, in addiction, like the woman, I thought this was interesting, comes out in weird ways in the, what was it? The story about the woman who cleans her whole house. She had her life of freedom.
Yes,
She marries the farmer.
that story.
Ooh,
Oof.
oof. She marries the farmer. She has babies. She is bored, miserable. And so what does she do? She puts on her beautiful blouse. She cleans the whole house. She puts on her beautiful blouse. I'm just looking for that.
Yeah, I know
Yeah,
exactly
no,
that part. Oh.
And the comment, I guess, on the page was every woman knows why she cleaned that house before she took her
Yeah.
life, right? So then she dies by suicide, and but she cleaned the house. She put on, after she scrubbed the floors, cleaned the house, she puts on her very best, clothes, and then she takes her life. Oh, here it is right here. Every woman alive knows why she washed the floors first, right? Because the way I read that is, you're damned if you do, if you're damned if you don't. If they came into a messy house, they'd be like, oh, that house was so messy anyway. She wasn't even keeping up with her duties as a wife, right? So
Yeah.
it's like, oh, I have to prove that I was a good wife. We had a clean house. We had everything tidied up. And then I'm taking my life because I'm so miserable. Like, I have to keep up with
Yeah.
the Joneses before I can even take my life. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if it's
Yes.
that way, but I was like, whoa, this was what?
Yeah, that particular story in the commentary is it's stuck with me. That's not something you you forget easily. In fact, I referenced it in a previous episode. I think it was back in the Goldilocks ones, when I was like, there was this story I read one time, and then when we read Bluebeard again this month, I was like, oh, here it was, because it just, yeah, it is so real to me. I feel like, um, life can be freaking hard. And especially when we are managing all these other expectations and perceptions and trying to do that dance, it's just even more exhausting, even more draining than it would have been otherwise. And, I think back on her story and think, what could it have been like if she would have even like gotten herself out of the dungeon a little bit more and like actually said, I think I need to visit the city more, or I think I need this thing to bring more life into my world, instead of feeling like her only option was to take her life. And, obviously we don't know her exact circumstances, and that we can't say that we would do better in that circumstance, but just recognizing the importance, at least in our own lives, of like really being clear on what brings more life to your life, what adds value to your life, instead of just playing the nice game and the don't rock the boat game, which is exhausting and is soul sucking.
Soul sucking. Yes, it is. It's the don't rock the boat, the don't, yes. And it's, I guess I'll say that it's not for everybody to rock the boat. It's not for everyone to be a rabble rouser or whatever. It's not for everyone. Some people just care less. That's okay. Some people just aren't into conflict, and that's okay too. It then becomes a different life, maybe an easier one for all I know. I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. So what if she never went and opened that door? There would always be that nagging, at least for me. What's in that room?
So true.
And instead of
Yeah.
hiding the key, she didn't want to talk to him about it. Like, maybe said, what? So I did go in the room. You told me not to, but I did, because we're married and I live here
Mm-hmm.
too. And why the hell do you have all those bodies in there? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Instead of
Yeah.
like trying to wash the key and make it stop bleeding and hide it, and it's bleeding all over
Yeah.
the place. And what is that? That can't just say it. Like,
It makes you wonder if she actually knew he wasn't safe earlier, like it says she has a hint of that, but it was like in that moment, it just confirmed her intuition, right? Where I've had, I can relate to that so much too, where I'm like, no, 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 it's fine. They're a super nice person. And then as I keep going, I'm like, oh, no, 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 they're not actually. No.
yes,
Yeah.
like giving them the benefit of the doubt, and then
Yeah.
or giving them trust that hasn't been earned, or giving them,
Ooh.
right, like.
Yes.
And so I think, and the enamored, like, she was enamored by what he could offer, a beautiful
Mhm.
castle, all the food, she's taken care of. And in a brief moment, that matters until it doesn't, until you're like, wait a minute here, I'm dealing with a murderer. And
Mhm.
so it's, it is a test of what's important and what, yeah, that we let slide in our lives when we know
Mm.
deep down we shouldn't, until it gets to that point that you just said, like, whoa, wait a minute, who is this person?
Yeah, and I loved in what you're bringing forward in also thinking of the bodies in the dungeon, like Clarissa Pinkola Estes' commentary mentions of it's like also our hopes and dreams, right? So like it can be extreme to think of this story when you're like, well, I don't live with a murderer, but it's like how many times are we in relationships where it is a dream killer, a hope killer, right? And that's just as bad, or maybe not just as bad. I shouldn't equate that, but it is, it's traumatizing. It's not a place where we can grow and be free and feel safe and create and do amazing things, you know?
Yeah, I love that you're bringing that up, because it's not just about the bodies, right? The bodies could be
Mm-hmm.
hopes, could be dreams, could be aspirations, could be whatever it is we want in our life that we just stuff down in the cellar. And it
Mm-hmm.
is yeah, the killer, right? It's the symbol of killing all of those things, killing, frankly, a big part of self.
Yeah.
And that's, yeah, and the things that we do and the consequences that happen when we don't listen to our intuition. I mean, if I look back and I'm like, wow, some of the decisions, whoa, I should have, what if I would have listened? It's like, what if I would have opened that
Mm.
door instead of this door? You know, yeah, it
Wow.
might be with like a Ford Pinto, and when this store was the Tesla. But at the time, my intuition said, you might want to take the Pinto or something, or what, you know what I mean? You might want to take
Mm-hmm.
that Nissan Leaf.
Yeah.
But I'm enamored with the Tesla. But you know what I
Wow.
mean? Whatever it is.
Same, same. Yeah. So relatable. Man, well, we could talk about this forever because it's such a deep topic, right? But I'd love just in closing and wrapping it together, I'd love to hear first if there's anything you wish we would have talked about that you'd like to hit on, but also just like what are you walking away from this myth with? Like what's it inspiring in you, or what are you hoping to remember or do differently?
Yeah, thanks. I think mainly that this myth is really about trusting yourself. And it is a test. I think the universe, our daily lives are a test of your sense of self, your self worth, your self value,
Mm.
your whatever it is, trusting your intuition. And when we step out of that congruence, the alignment of being in alignment with self, yes, it takes us down different paths. Yes, we're going to have consequences. Yes, yes, yes. But to get back in, boy, the mess we create when we get off, to pull back in, to get ourselves back on the train. I mean, I do think I think that's how we learn. I think that is life right there. That is the journey that our souls get to be on, that we're learning and that we are challenged every day. And it's how much can you trust yourself is the name of the game, to stay in alignment and to not be knocked off your chair when we make a wrong decision or we're not listening to ourselves or shit hits the fan or whatever is, how do we stay in that integrity? And so that story is about the ways that we betray ourselves and how easy it is to do it with all the things we just talked about. And if we just listen a little deeper and trust that we know what's best for us,
Mm.
um, then we're not hoarding crap in the cellar. We're not pushing it down. We're not storing whatever it is we store, because then when you have to open that cellar and sift through it, it's years, right? It's the hard work of life. And it is, yeah. So I guess what I would say is the story was hugely inspiring. And I love that you talked to your kids about it. And I definitely will be talking to mine, because it
Mm.
is, I think it's a profound story that I think everyone needs to read and be aware of, in the journey to self.
Ooh, so beautiful. I could not agree more. And just to like add to that in closing, I feel, the thing that I'm walking away with is that we just are not guaranteed time. That there's going to be more time that we can finally pull those things out of the cellar and we can finally live that dream or go after that goal or create what we really want. And so I think for myself, I've become a little bit more urgent since reading it and really feeling into the story right now about taking those like you're saying, just those intuitive knowings much more seriously, and getting more curious about how can we do this now instead of waiting for someday when things look different and everything is perfect. It's never going to come. It feels like every day we're hearing of people who are getting cancer diagnoses at very young ages and they're terminal, and it came as a total surprise. And like, you just never know how long you have. And my hope is that this story is inspiring in each of us also just a renewed courage to keep that door open and take those dreams seriously, breathe life back into them, breathe life back into those hopes, and not be so rigid in this is just the way it is or this is just the way I am, but instead be able to be a little bit more playful with life and see what's possible. Just see what you can create, see what's there to experience. So, gosh, it's been such an incredible conversation, Kathy. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much, Quinn. I think you just summed that up beautifully. Time. It's about time. And that we just don't have that much of it to sift through the cellar of the hopes and dreams that we thought we could get to. And I think that is a beautiful way to sum it up and sum the story up. So thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you for being here. In Flow and On Fire is a weekly podcast to help you find your flow and stoke your inner fire so that you can live more joyfully, create those big and beautiful dreams, and make the world a better place. Living in Flow on Fire isn't a destination, it's a daily practice. We make this show every week to help support you in that practice with deep inspirational insights and real-world examples of other soulful people who are leaning into this journey also. To better support your In-Flow On Fire practice, we send you each week's episode via email direct to your inbox so you never miss a beat. Go to quincurtis.com/email to sign up and stay inspired. Also, when you sign up, you'll get access to my free Living in Flow and On Fire guide. A step-by-step path to find your flow and stoke your fire today. Sign up at quincurtis.com/email to amp up your inflow and on fire lifestyle with me now. This has been another episode of Inflow and On Fire, a weekly podcast cheering you on to follow your heart and come more alive. It can be tough to stay in flow and keep your creative fires burning bright, so please take this podcast with you on your journey. Subscribe so we can keep fanning your flames and cheering you on each week. If you got something out of this episode and haven't already left us a review, please do. Positive reviews really, really help other people who need this to find it also. I'm your host, Quinn Curtis, artist, mother of 5, and aspiring children's book author illustrator. I'm here creating this show because I know just how hard it can be to even just stay excited and engaged in our everyday lives. With so many demands for our time and attention, it can be especially tricky to prioritize those nudges from our heart and soul. However, the costs like depression, disconnection, anxiety, overwhelm, loneliness, lack of fulfillment, and so much more are really high when we don't. So every week I gather soulful stories, inspiring ideas, and incredible people to help us stay connected to our inner compass and remember what's most important. Ultimately, I created this show because I need those regular reminders too, but my hope is it can also inspire and help you to keep going and bring more of your magic that's inside of you out into the world. We need it. Special thanks to Avesa and Maddie Love for our theme music. Thank you so much for listening, friend. In between now and when we connect again, stay in flow on fire. It matters and you matter.